Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about the power of player-centric marketing. Now, traditional marketing methods often struggle to cut through the noise, leaving indie developers searching for better ways to reach their audience. But what if the key isn't just better tactics or bigger budgets, but a deeper understanding of players themselves? Well, in this episode, we dive into how player centric design principles can transform marketing efforts, helping developers craft content that feels authentic and resonates emotionally, allowing them to build stronger player connections. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Greg Posner. Greg, how's it going, bud? And thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It is going fantastic. It is post GDC. I feel like I'm finally caught back up on sleep.
Yeah.
And now's the endless, dauntless task of catching up and following up with everyone that you meet at GDC. So, it's good to be settled again, I guess, for lack of better words.
Oh, man, I'm right there with you because it was quite a gauntlet there and coming back. And thank goodness I primarily told everybody 2 weeks is okay to follow up, right? And they're like, yeah, that's great. I'm like, thanks, because I needed it this time. But yeah, I'm right there with you. But yeah, folks, Greg, for those of you who aren't familiar with him, he is the founder of Player Driven, a consultancy and home of the Player Driven podcast, which is really exciting. It's always fun to find new podcasts and stuff. And I highly recommend, listening to Greg's. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but because honestly, a lot of the stuff Greg talks about is what we talk about here on the show. So can't recommend it enough. He was also a former podcaster. Honestly, Greg you've had tons of experience in podcasting, right?
I have, which is weird because in person, I'm really introverted and it takes me a little bit of courage or alcohol, whichever comes first, to really like loosen up and talk to people. But my real background is sales engineering. And not everyone knows what a sales engineer is. It's what I've learned, but it's basically the technical side of sales. So I've always been a techie person at heart. And I became a sales engineer, which means I supported my sales team. The sales team would do the hard selling. I would do the technical selling. And I learned that it's basically storytelling, and it's explaining how you can explain to a CEO or a CTO, how does this API call work? And maybe a CTO will know that, but a CEO may not know that language, right? So how do you explain the concept to them in a way that they understand? And what I started to realize is, people are looking to me as a storyteller, and the podcast translates in the same way. I can tell stories in the podcast about technology. So in my mind, what I've at least sold myself on is that podcasting is a step advancing the sales engineer role, because it's allowing you to reach a broader audience on explaining what these concepts are and breaking them down as you do, right, with the marketing side of things, and let other people understand, like, hey, you're a developer, you may not understand the importance of this, right? And I don't know, I'm on a tangent here, but yeah, lots of podcast experience because of that. I feel like it all came from that.
That's a great point though. And I love that you share that too, because, I see this in the line of work, that we do all the time is like, communication's everything, and how you communicate that. And the fact that you're saying like, okay, sales engineer sounds technical, but then I saw it as I'm really telling stories, and stories is probably one of the most oldest and tried and true methods of communication, right? So, I mean, honestly, not to downplay any of your past experiences, because they're all super valuable and interesting, but I think that was like super insightful and informative at the same time. So I'm glad you shared that. And I mean, just to recap real quick on some of the other things, I mean, in terms of podcasting, Greg, I mean, you've done, Help Shift. You were a podcaster on that show, and then Player Engage podcasts. And
Yep.
then, as you mentioned, former director of solutions engineering at Help Shift, which is Keywords Technology, right?
Yeah, so Keywords and HelpShift were the ones that first gave me the ability to start the podcast. Keywords is a very services-oriented company, which is great. They're fantastic. They're a large company. I'm not used to working for large companies, but they didn't know what to do with a sales engineer because they sold services, not technology. So that's when they asked if I wanted to start a podcast. So from there, Player Engaged podcast was born. I left Keywords in late October, and they let me keep the podcast because I was the only one basically working on it, and we had an audience at that point. So it's kind of Player Driven, is built on the foundation of Player Engage, which started at Keywords. I know this is like a whole crime scene board. You have to start putting like tax and stuff all around to see where it goes where. But it all kind of came from Keyword/HelpShift, right? Enabling me to get started. And then I kind of ran with it.
Sweet. Well, such a good story there and everything. And, love that you shared that. And just curious, I'm between the podcasts and specifically now this one, which is, player driven. Hey, when you have some spare time, whenever that may happen, what do you do for fun or any hobbies or anything like that?
Yeah, I play video games, but I also have two kids and they take a lot of my time. So I have a 6-year-old son. And now you're in New Hampshire. I'm in New Jersey. The sun is starting to come out and starting to defrost outside. So it's
Yes.
baseball season. So we play as much baseball. We get outside as much as we can. I really am very family oriented in it. And I think at a certain time of day, I like to disconnect from work and spend time there. I do go mad after a few minutes of hanging out with my family. I want to pull my hair out. But I'm grateful that I have these opportunities because they will grow up and not want to be talking to me as much anymore. So it's kind of like this yin and yang. But hobbies are, I mean, now it's getting nice out. Sports. I love gardening. Gardening is probably my one true hobby. So I've been outside every weekend. I've taught my kids how to weed and how to get everything set up for me, so life's easier there. And cooking. I love cooking. Cooking, if I could do anything my whole life, it would be cooking. But the hours for cooks are terrible, and I don't want to work the overnight shifts. So
Yeah.
lots of hobbies that I do sprinkle in here and there, but I love what I do, and I do consider it part of a hobby. When you're a gamer, I mean, I'm learning about how games are made, and I think it's just fascinating. You get to see how these communities are built, why a game takes 4 or 5 years to come out, right? As much as it makes people go crazy, but you see how the sausage is made, and it's really cool and insightful.
Yeah. Well, I think post talk we may need to talk a little bit some about those hobbies because I've gotten into gardening a bit more over the past year. And anyways, we'll
What are
discuss.
you growing?
Well, nothing yet, but I went to town on the raised beds that I made because and I
Mm.
completely forgot what it is. It's like the yaki something method where I burned the boards so they are last longer, and it was quite a process, but it was a lot of fun. And now I want my deck to be like that when I redo that. But anyways, well, I digress. But
Your hobby is burning wood, then?
yes, burning wood and then planting stuff in it, I guess. I don't know.
There
Anyways,
you go.
good stuff. But yeah, so now that we got to know you a little bit more, we want to get to know you a little bit more by doing a quick rapid fire with the Q box round. And folks, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q box round is just a few random questions I prepared here today for Greg. So, Greg, are you ready for the Q
I'm
box round?
I am ready.
All right. Number one is what was your childhood favorite game?
My favorite game growing up was a mix between Command and Conquer Red Alert 2 and Tiberian Sun. I was very big into real-time strategy games, and I feel like they really defined my childhood.
Nice. All right. Next is what's your favorite, most helpful app?
This was a tough one. This is a good question, and two or three came to mind, and I hate the answer I put because it's wild, but it's also fantastic. The app I love the most right now is ChatGPT. And people are like, oh my God, you chose the most popular technology out there right now. I have been taking pictures. It's not a video podcast here, but I'll show you. Like, I take scratch notes. It's crap. I'm sorry. I don't know if I could curse here, right? And what I've been doing is I've been taking pictures with the ChatGPT app of my scratch notes, and I say, can you make sense of these? And it puts it all together in a way that makes it so easily comprehensible. And then I can take either pictures of slides or other visuals that I want to add to that and build a story around it. Or if I need to tell my kid a story, I can say, hey, tell me a story about Iron Man fighting the Hulk, right? There's so much cool things you can do with technology. And the ChatGPT app has let me do, whether it be my chicken crap notes that I'm taking here or anything, and make my life kind of easier by translating it into a language that is easily digestible.
I absolutely love that. And you just gave me a ton of ideas too to leverage that tool. So that's great. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show is what game are you playing now?
I am playing mainly 2 or 3 games right now. I'm gonna go through all of them, sorry. With my friends who are my high school friends, college friends, we play online every night. We just right now we're stuck on Call of Duty. And we want to quit Call of Duty, but we have nowhere to go. We need a cross-platform game because my one friend Tim is a PC gamer that kills us. But we've been playing Call of Duty, and by myself, I've been playing Avowed, and then lastly, I started picking up Manor Lords again to scratch that RTS ish itch.
Nice. Well, all good games, all good choices. And yeah, man, thanks for sharing all that so we can get to know you a little bit more. But now, folks, we're going to get into the heart of this conversation, which is, I think something that we could all dive into a little bit more. It relates and resonates with me as it does with Greg, and why it couldn't have been a better person to talk about this, which is the power of player-centric marketing. And, to kick things off, a lot about, like what you talk about on your podcast and everywhere else, honestly, you talk a lot about player engagement. So, based on that, how do you define a truly player centric approach in both, let's say, game design and in marketing?
But before I jump into any of this, I want there to be a caveat said that a lot of this requires a good game being built. You can have the best player engagement, the best strategy, the best everything around it. And then if you release a crap game, it's going to be crap, right? So everything I talk about, I truly believe in, but it requires a game that's being made with love, that's playable, right? It doesn't even have to be the best game in the world, but it needs to be something that's functional, something that is being built out of passion. A lot of times you see these live service games being pushed out, like companies are making them make it, and you can just tell it's missing love. With that being said, I think when you're looking at making a game player centric, like player experience, that comes down to data. You need to understand the audience of the players that play the type of game that you're playing. Where do they live? How do they interact with games? Are they playing a card game where they're less social, so there's no reason to start a Discord because they're all kind of doing their own thing? Is it a multiplayer front first where you want to have everyone in a Discord and do that? What are the average ages, right? Do you want to be posting to find them on Facebook, or are they going to be more likely on TikTok and the other strategies there? How are you collecting this data from your players? Is it in-app? Are you sending out emails afterwards? I think in order to build all this stuff out, it all comes down to data at the end of the day, and then what you decide to do with that data. You're not going to make strategic choices just based off of closing your eyes and saying, I think this is the best way to go. Will it work? It might. You're taking a shot in the dark. But when you start looking at this data, you get a better understanding of who your audience is, what type of players are playing, who's spending money in game, who's not spending money in game, who's spending the most time in game, what region do they live in. There's lots of questions here. So I think it all comes down to understanding the right type of data, collecting that data, and doing what you want with it. That was a lot of answer there. I don't know if it all
No,
connected.
no, that's perfect. I mean, yeah, it was a lot, but I mean, it's all valid to the point. I mean, folks, knowing your audience, but like knowing those details, that data is essential, because otherwise, I mean, Greg, you said it perfectly. You'll be taking a shot in the dark. You might have an idea of what these people like, and man, a classic example you just laid out too is like, with Discord. Hey, let's get a Discord. We want a community, but it's like, well, what if your audience could care less about Discord, right? Like, I mean, it might not be, and if that's the case, it's like, then why do the work? And what else could you be refocusing, that attention and stuff? So all great stuff. In light of everything you just shared, though, I want to get like maybe a little bit deeper into some, insights and what we can take from this, this other data to for smarter marketing, essentially. So how, like, you mentioned a lot about this data and information that we can use to help, make better decisions. But like, what are some ways that indie devs, can, find that data? Like, how can they better understand their players and get that data? Like, what are the tools or methods, I guess, or even strategies would you recommend, even at, let's say, a high level? Because I know some of these things can be pretty intricate in where to, source this information.
Yeah, I think it comes down to taking a look at a game, the framework when you're building it. What data do you want to start collecting upfront? When you design these games, you can put the pieces of data that you want to capture from the players up front. So maybe you ask the player when they're registering, right? What's your name? What's your birthday? Not everyone's going to put that stuff, and that's fine, right? What's your gender? You can put any of this information. You can also use tools online, and I'm not even sure of the right tools to use, but I know there's tools like Mixpanel and other tools out there that will collect player-centric data, right? And then all of a sudden you start having this database of who your players are. You might need a CRM on the background. There's tools like PlayFab that are out there that allow you to understand who your players are. There's also cheaper tools out there. PlayFab's owned by Microsoft, and I don't endorse them, but I know they're a good tool. You need to look at your player base as if they are your, I always go back to the business side of things, that they're your businesses that you're selling to, right? A player is your business, right? And they're going to be different values. You have your enterprise players; those are the ones that spend a lot in game, and then you have kind of your indie gamers. Those might be the ones that don't spend in game. But it's all about creating this database of these players, so you can relate what player actions are taken by what player, and then you can start to report on that, right? So maybe you have a mixed panels backend that allows you to collect this data, to view this data, right? From there, you say, hey, in my game, I want to know who has coins, who's making these purchases, what are they doing? Maybe you're launching the spring event for live ops, right? And you want to say, hey, how many people are clicking this button to go enter the spring event? And then you can start to say, hey, I see Andrew hasn't entered my spring event, but he's entered the winter event and the past fall event. Maybe we want to shoot him a message and say, hey, I see you're not entering this event. Why? Is there a reason why not, right? Companies are starting to hire these VIP specialists internally, right? And what their job is to do market research on your own players and get a better understanding of why are they taking actions in games and why aren't they taking actions in games. So you might see these trends like, hey, Andrew's logging in less often than he did. Maybe we want to reach out to him or give him an offer or not give him an offer, right? This all lives in your database of data where you're capturing it, whether, again, it be a PlayFab, a mixed panel, something else on the back end, right? So I think you need to, when you look at your framework and you're building out your framework, you want to make sure you say, hey, at a minimum, I'm collecting players' names, players' regions, players' genders, players, I keep saying gender, I don't know why, right? And just so you understand this stuff, right? And I think you set it up in the beginning so that when you start to scale, you are at least collecting that data. It's easy to just say, you know what, I'm just not going to collect this anymore, rather than saying, oh, now we need to add another data point 6 months in the future and then trying to backtrack everything. Again, sorry if I'm rambling here.
No, that's all right. I mean, all great points. I mean, when you can, I mean, let's face it, folks, we're not always in these positions maybe to collect some of this types of data, but I mean, leading with that mindset and really making it a focus and point two as early as possible is, just going to make things so much, more helpful. I mean, it's like that, or like when the question is, when should I market a game? It's like when should you plant a tree? It's like, yeah, it's always yesterday. But regardless of where you are in your journey, keeping that in mind and leading with that forefront, it's just going to make things so much simpler. Not necessarily easier, but it will make it simpler. So all great points. On that note, Greg, you talked a lot about data and stuff, and I think this is something we all can relate to. But another form of data or insight is feedback on the game, whether it's from play tests or other types of feedback. You know, Considering this, what are some practical ways to incorporate player feedback and even some maybe emotional insights, if we can pick up on that, into our marketing efforts? How can that really benefit us, and how can we use it?
Yeah, I think feedback is one of my favorite topics. It's something we talked a lot about while I was at HelpShift, right? So it's really top of mind. I think it's imperative to be collecting feedback, or important to be collecting feedback at any point, at any stage of the game, right? Especially if you're first launching. Feedback can be started as cheap as $0, right? Put an email, say, hey, leave some feedback, right? Is it going to get engaged that much? Honestly, probably not. People don't want to send emails anymore. We're past that time, but at least you can have something there, and some people might fill it out. The next level, which might have a minimal investment, is feedback forms. Go to Google Forms, create a feedback form, right? Say, hey, maybe you create an event in game after level 10. We're going to drop the player a push notification saying, hey, do you mind leaving some feedback? Or you put it in your settings menu saying, hey, leave some feedback here, right? And then finally, I think the best type of feedback would be in-game chat. Whether you build your own tool, you have a tool that you use, right? you can proactively push out at different moments in these games. Say, hey, we see you've been stuck on level 10 for a few days. Do you want to leave some feedback on level 10? Or, hey, we saw you quit in the middle of a match the other day, right? This real time chat allows you to proactively reach out at specific in game moments or product moments, I guess gaming moments, to see how it sees fit. And I think it's important for marketing to follow the lead, right? You want to make sure things are worded properly. There's different segments and you're going to work with them differently, right? You might be a little more upfront with your VIPs because you want some more information about deep gameplay. Whereas, hey, Greg just started playing yesterday. Maybe we want some broad feedback from Greg, right? Like, hey, you gonna come back or something like that, right? I think you can make those decisions. And I think, you want to, for the marketing side, you want to create something a little unique for the different segments. So it seems like it's being asked to me directly, especially if I am spending a lot of money in games. It might be better for you to reach out to me directly and say, hey, Greg, do you mind giving some feedback? We were working with a number of the I don't think I'm allowed to give names based on what happened, but we were working with some AAA studios that had these VIP teams that players had specific account managers assigned to them, and their goal was that each month we have to reach out to each one of our players that are VIPs and see, hey, what are you playing? What aren't you playing? What don't you like? Right? I think, when you become large enough where you can afford to scale like that, and it's great money spent because you can get insights from your top players on why they are playing. Because once the top player leaves, it's going to be really hard to get them to come back.
Those are some really interesting things. And one point I think that really one thing that you said that summarizes this really well is just, follow that lead. So it's like you start getting this feedback, you start getting some other insights and data too, and kind of like follow that trail, right? And sometimes, like you said, it comes down to looking at those different segments and breaking things down that way because, feedback itself is great, but it also can get a lot of it can be tricky because it's like it pulls you in so many different directions, right?
Mhm.
So, I think with what you said, those segments can really help, further define things a little bit with more clarity instead of just grouping it all together as one thing. Cause it's tough because I think what that does is create a problem where, hey, I might be trying to make everybody happy and you can't do that. Right. So it's a fine balancing act. And I mean, everything from forms down to like a lot more advanced stuff. I mean, ultimately, it sounds like I think one of the key things here, whether it can scale or not, and not everything scales at first, folks, is it sounds like have conversations with your players or your audience or whatever. And I think that's sometimes a key thing that we may forget to have, or at least even monitoring conversations, because that can be so valuable to us when we really dig in, and if we especially want to get those player centric insights and such.
Yeah, not that long ago, I watched a video on the making of Balatro, and I love Balatro. I lost a few months of my life to that, and it was fascinating because it was talking about how the developer didn't even have that in mind when making the game. He wanted to make a game for himself, right, and maybe two or three of his friends, and then two or three of his friends started giving him some feedback on, hey, you might want to insert this loop or this type of loop into it. And he's like, okay, I'll try and do that. And if he hadn't listened to those people, he still might be making a game he's proud of, but he wouldn't have won game of the year and stuff like that along with it. So, and it's always a weird conversation. And one of my old bosses used to say it this weird way. He said, no one likes to call your baby ugly, but if people are willing to take the time to make suggestions, so you might want to listen to it because your baby is going to be your baby. You're sold on what it is, but you need to hear from outside people how you want to shape that. And if you listen to the right people and if you make the right decisions, it doesn't mean everyone's decision's right? Everyone's feedback's right. Some of it's just pure bad. But you got to listen to that stuff and weigh those judgments and say, you know what, this change makes sense. If you try and do it all yourself, you're going to create a game that maybe you love, but it might just be you.
Yeah, I like that advice too because you're right. I mean, there's all different nuances. We'll all be in different scenarios, and we all have our own biases too on top of that. But it's a great point. If people are taking the time to make a comment, I mean that says something there. And yeah, sometimes you do need to take it with the grain of salt, right? But it like think about it. Like how hard is it? How often do we go out and we're like, hey, we need play testers, we want feedback and stuff. So okay, great. You have maybe you got 10, maybe 5% of play testers of those you reached out to, and then maybe another only 20 or 10% that actually provide feedback. That's big. So the ones that are actually saying something that's meaningful. But again, you got to take with it. But I think that quote summarizes and what your boss told you, I think summarizes a lot in terms of how you can go forward and move with that. And you know what? I think Balatra is like a prime example of that too, because that's a scenario so many of us I think can relate with.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I had another point as you were talking, but it kind of slipped my mind. It is there's also two types of feedback, right? There's qualitative feedback and quantitative feedback.
Hmm.
And understanding the different types of feedback you're getting and how to use them are different. Both of them are just as important, right? One's more the meaning of the feedback, and the others is more just the numbers of the feedback, right? But if someone were to come to you and just say your game sucks, like, okay, you want to give
Yeah.
me more detail?
Thanks.
Like everyone says that. Thank you. Do you care to explain why it sucks? Right? Break that down and get a better understanding of that. But I mean, numbers count as well, right? How many people are saying that? I remember we were working with another studio. We were making a Avengers game, mobile game. Maybe it was Scopely. I don't remember who. And or Ultimate Alliance, and like the Hulk got buffed to a point where he was too strong, and they started seeing
Not
on different.
surprised.
Yeah, well, I started seeing these posts on whether it was Reddit or Twitter at the time saying, hey, the Hulk was too buffed, right? And like they didn't realize this at first, but they quickly caught on to that trend and were able to reverse it before it got too well pushed out. And that's, again, listening to your audience. It wasn't direct feedback to you, the studio, it was online, but they were able to capture that feedback and say, hey, we need to make this fixed because we're seeing a spike of negative sentiment around this change and we can get ahead of it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that itself is a great example too, because if we really did distill that one too, I mean, that's just like hearing feedback in a larger capacity or one that's not necessarily direct. It's kind of like an indirect one and really keeping a pulse on things. And with that studio, they did, and then they're like, oh wow, this is totally flying under our radar. We didn't realize it. You know, glad it came out because it could have been very problematic, I'm sure, further along. So all great
Mm.
stuff. I want to be able to, shift things a little bit because I know that, we talked a lot about, you know, how we can leverage insights, how we can take some of this information, gather it, and then, and leverage it in all these different ways and stuff, whether it's with development and even some marketing pushes and stuff too. In light of that, actually, I realize I might be getting ahead, but are there any other like particular examples that you could share from some of the stuff we just talked about?
Well, I think, we're in a different day and age of marketing, and I think it's fascinating. And I'll go back to one of my favorite games I've been playing. Manor Lords is a great example of that. Manor Lords, small studio, was it one dude, I think, who's making the game, right? Who just happened to build a community, and that community got very vocal in a positive way and shot Manor Lords up to the top of Steam, which, I mean, I don't know the last time a strategy game like that would probably be at the top of Steam, but it just showed the power of marketing, listening to the right people, and building an audience around it. I think if you're an indie studio right now, that it's going to be a tough year for indie studios. I think it's going to be great because there's going to be a lot of cool games that come out, but the problem is that there's a lot of cool games coming out, and we both said it earlier, right? We both have multiple kids, and we only have so much time to dedicate towards games. I did a podcast, and it was this fascinating quote that when we're young, we're time rich and money poor, right? So we have tons of times to play games. The problem is we can't afford multiple games. And now we are money rich, but time poor. We have the money to play the games, but not the time. And even if we have the time, do we want to dedicate it to a 30, 40, 50, 70-hour game, right? That's not called GTA or Red Dead, right? And it becomes this, hey, how do I make this happen? And when so many cool indie games come at once, what are we supposed to do? First of all, finding the games are not easy, right? You go on Steam and you look at Steam's top charts, and what do you see? You see CS:GO, you see Minecraft, you see whatever, right? Your normal everyday guys. So everyone's like, oh, well, we're on Steam. That's great. You should be there. The problem is being found is like a needle in a haystack, right? So this is where the new age of marketing comes in. And it's something that you probably know better than me. I'm trying to wrap my head around, right? Like TikTok. I was not a TikToker before any of this, right? And I've learned to live on TikTok. I think it's great, especially for cooking, for gardening, right? I can find my quick 1 minute tips. And I was thinking, we need more game content on TikTok, right? We need stuff like that. And I think Manor Lords kind of understood, hey, if we build up the community, and maybe they didn't even know it, but they just backed into it. We built up a community. The community loved the game. The community started sharing posts about the game, sharing videos of the game, sharing all this, and through some sort of guerrilla warfare marketing, again, I don't think planned upon, the game went viral. And I think studios need to look at it. Obviously, every studio wants to go viral, but how do you tap into this community? How do you listen to it? And I think it's everything we talked about, the feedback, the stuff like that. It all plays back into it. But my answer to your question is Manor Lords. I think it's a prime example of that. But there's a lot of cool indie games coming up. But again, I think it's embracing this new style of marketing. It's no longer, I'm just going to pay for Facebook ads and let Facebook handle it, right? Because quite frankly, the people that are gaming on Facebook are probably not the ones that are playing the hardcore shooters or any of those games that you might be making. So it's embracing that, understanding what changes, where we should be posting, how we should be posting, and all that.
Yeah, no, I think you said that perfectly too. And it is that shift. I mean, the one thing I have seen over the years, folks, is people in general are very, very savvy. And it's not just with games. It's with any interaction that they have online. It's with they're becoming more savvy with the content they consume. I think a classic example, look at movies and shows made in the 90s, okay? And then fast forward to now. Even as much as I loved X-Files, if you watch some of the first few episodes of that show, you're like, really? Like, it's so far-fetched and ridiculous. Is not all of them. I mean, X-Files is pretty good, but there are so many others that, like, they can't keep, like, reproducing the content that the way they have, and now you're like, "Oh, wow, people are catching on. They gotta be smarter. The writers need to really be on top of their game because us people are getting into this." And the same thing with, like, when it comes to video games, when it comes to how they engage with content, when it comes to all this stupid distractions that are out there on the web and stuff, right? And your point's right. So it's like, what else are you doing to really stand out? And standing out isn't just about making more noise. I mean, that can help, but it really is about how do you resonate? How do you make those connections? And if you're going to do that, you got to lead with like a player first mindset, not just about, you know, seeing what Facebook ads can get you the most return on investment. Hey, it's a method, it helps, but you can't just leverage that. You need to take that strategy and accompany it with whatever else you're deciding to do. So,
It's funny. I don't know if this is going to relate at all, but I'll say it, right? I read a while ago that Sesame Street is getting their funding cut, and people were upset by that. It takes about a few $1 million to make an episode of, I think, to make an episode of Sesame Street. And with two kids, I loved Sesame Street. It's much better than all the other stuff I think on TV there. It had some cool guests. Like it's a watchable show for an adult. And people were outraged. And then someone said, and I don't know the age of your kids, but my kids like Blippi. I don't love Blippi, but whatever. He's fine enough. And they said, why would we spend millions of dollars for an episode of Sesame Street when Blippi can do it for a fraction of that and put out the same quality of content? Yes, there might be a different quality where maybe Sesame Street's a little better, but it was a fascinating thought that that's not wrong. I mean, these guys are putting out content that kids love. They're actually learning from it potentially. And I love Sesame Street, but how do you justify the price difference? And I would fight to get Sesame Street kept on, but like with this new era of how people are creating content, how people are consuming content, is there space for that still, or do they have to pivot as well? And it's this weird dilemma to be in, I guess.
yeah. And you know what? While it doesn't relate directly, I think it totally relates because you're right. That's a great example. I think that puts it in a really unique perspective because I think when we look at games, we might not necessarily see them as we see them as all the same. I mean, I'm speaking very broadly here, right? But picking up on kind of those differences in that example can maybe allow us to look at games with this different type of lens, the Sesame Blippy lens.
Exactly, right? For better or for worse.
Yeah, yeah, but I love that example because I really think it gives us that unique perspective to kind of look at games in a similar way and see if we can kind of pick up on these things. I mean, I see that sometimes a little bit when you have people that are like, "Oh, our game is inspired by, Stardew Valley," right? And they keep looking at things that Stardew Valley did. But guess what? There have been like several other iterations upon, your cozy farm simulator games that have already addressed problems and things that people want that are more in demand than what Stardew Valley provides. So if you're looking based off of that, like, that maybe that's kind of an offshoot example of how we can use this lens to kind of look at
Mhm.
things. Because if you're just looking at solving the, let's say, problems that Stardew Valley players had, and then you address those, well, there's any number of other games in that space that already address those. So you're just doing the same thing. You're not like kind of one upping it or finding different unique ways to pivot a little bit. I maybe took it a little out of context, but just an
No,
idea.
I think that's a great point, but my differentiator there would be marketing, right? Like you said, like if if you build it, they will come is not true. If you build
Right.
a game that addresses all Stardew Valley's problems, if I don't say anything about it, how's anyone going to find my game? The truth is, they can make Stardew Valley and not fix anything, but if they market it right, they can still get the people right. At a certain point, whether you want to or not, you need to pay for marketing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, word of mouth is good, and if it happens organically, Godspeed. Like ride that train as far as you can. But the truth is, like you need to be in front of players, and there needs to be some sort of spend, whether it be on TikTok or whether it be on Reddit or whether it be wherever your gamers live, right? I think just because there's a better product out there doesn't mean people know that.
Yeah. In light of everything we've been talking about, you brought up a few times about, pivoting and kind of like, how things are changing in terms of like how people consume content and things like that. And one thing I know pre-show we were kind of discussing a little bit too, I thought was interesting is kind of like, you know, kind of the innovative ways people are using content, especially when it is around like, short form content. I mean, you probably mentioned TikTok at least like 3 or 4 times today, right?
I love
So
it.
in light of that, I want to kind of discuss some of these creative ways that are more contemporary, if you will, creative and innovative ways that, indie developers are kind of using this short form content to, let's say, create even, stronger emotional connections with players. So how have you been seeing this? Because I know it's been top of mind for you.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways you utilize the content to help build your audience, right? I think the first one is if you're not taking video and putting it into any of the social tools right now, right? I think that's a miss, right? I think even whether it be TikTok or Instagram versus YouTube, right? And I'm talking regular YouTube, not shorts, right? Like sometimes you see people take the widescreen and put the widescreen into TikTok, so it's this weird little like
Yeah.
widescreen
It's not
video and the
framed
big,
quite right.
and that's fine. I do that sometimes too, right? It's simple, but if I'm spending 30 minutes of watching Call of Duty and then I'm watching the finals and then I see a little small shooters game like this, like, all right, I'm gonna skip that one, right? Like people aren't going to find you unless you put that stuff out there, right? You should be finding, and I hate this part of what I do, is hashtag research. It's not worth my time. It is worth my time, but it's not worth my time to figure out what are the right hashtags to get in front of the right audience. We were working with a military simulator shooter, but more realistic than Call of Duty, right? And they were just using generic FPS hashtags. And I found out there's like a mil sim hashtag. And when we started using that, we saw a big boost in views because we found the right audience that found this type of stuff. I think if you're building a game right now, you want to just start putting some content out there so people can see the game. You might want to start a Discord. I'm a big fan of Discord, unless you're starting like a Sudoku type of game, where you can at least bring your friends who are playing the game to get that feedback. Say, hey, send your clips in. I just think a lot of people are very secretive about their game until they're ready to launch. And I get that because people copy games all the time. But the thing is, people copy games all the time. So you might as well put something out there so people can start to see. There's a game that I did a podcast with. I can't think of the name off the top of my head right now, but they started before they launched. Like people were creating songs and lore and drawings in Discord before they even launched because they loved the idea of the game. And I thought that was so cool that basically they already have their own marketing team. And this is just community people that are building stuff for them. And the truth is, if you build it right, your community will start to work for you. And maybe you reward them with in-game stuff, or maybe eventually you hire them. We worked with a partner called Odin. They're a tool for Unity, but like their first few hires were people in their community that were helping people because they said, hey, the best people to help us are the people who are in our community right now helping people. And then they basically market it for you. So it's, again, I don't know if I'd call it guerrilla warfare type of marketing, but get people playing the game, get people talking about it. The more they get excited about it, they'll tell their friends, and they'll tell their friends, and they'll tell their friends. I think, you plant seeds now to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's again, and like Yeah, we get it. There can be that fear associated with putting yourself out there, whether potentially could steal the idea, whether you're just scared of what people will think, and maybe it's not the feedback or the engagement you want. Maybe there is no engagement, but guess what? You got to plant that seed sometime, or else nothing's going to grow. And some things may grow, and some things will start, and then they just crap out. Like we can relate with our gardens, right? That's crap happens all the time. So but you're not going to get any. You can't benefit from the fruits of your labor if you don't plant any seeds either. So there's a lot of interesting things going on there, but we still got to push ourselves.
And I'd also add on, and I get this still to when I post online. I don't know if you get, but I get very self conscious. I am told you earlier,
Yeah, I
I'm
do
an
too.
introvert at heart, right? But then you just kind of get over it. You look at some of the other
Yep.
stuff that people are putting out there, like you make a fool of yourself, unless you really, really make a fool of yourself and go viral, which is probably a good thing too. Like they're gonna forget about it the next day.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
don't overthink these things. If you're creating something, man, show it off. That's awesome. Like I wish I could build a game. That would be so fantastic.
Yeah. One of the tips I always use for myself and anybody else, if it relates, a conversation relates to it, is just as long as, like, if you're like, the one I say is if you think someone could interpret this in a very negative way, or like saying something about someone that could come off and make them feel bad, then just don't say it. But
Mhm.
otherwise, if it makes you kind of look like a fool or whatever, I mean, whatever. You can always, I wouldn't say backtrack, just call it out and own it. Oh, yeah. I wasn't that smart for it. Now what? Like, because that's one of the biggest things you can do is like, if you make a mistake like that and then you own it and agree with them, they're like, wow, you were wrong with that. And you're like, yeah, I was right. They don't know what to do because they're probably waiting for you to oppose. And you're like, nope, you're right. So that's a good setback. It might not feel good internally, but it's a good way to combat that and help you move forward. And the more times those happen, you're going to find out the less that they're going to actually happen. So I know we're coming on time here, but one thing I wanted to talk about real quick is, we talked about, some of the ways we can kind of use this innovative content, how others have been and such, are like, what I want to get curious about is and dive into for a moment is how do you think what are the best ways that we can maybe create some of this content, whether it's short form or other, to get as authentic as possible or aligned with the game's experience that we're providing to players? Like, are there any things specific that comes to mind when we want to do create content that really resonates?
That's a good question, and I don't know if I really have an answer for it. I can talk through some ideas that go through my head, but I don't think there's like a silver bullet here that will be the right
There's
answer.
never a silver bullet, so
If there was, life would be so much easier, right?
right? We wouldn't be talking probably here. We're like, why bother? There's the bullet.
Something I appreciate that's a little more of a trend now is just simplicity, like just posting the video of the game. Like don't over edit it, don't overdo anything, right? Just put it out there, right? I think there is a value to touching things up, but there's certain videos that you should be doing that for, and there's certain ones you should just be like, you know what? Here's just gameplay footage. Just looks awesome. Like one of my buddies, it's a studio called Stratton Studios. They're launching a FPS. It's completely browser based, like, and it's a AAA looking game. Just like, wow, this is all in my browser. It doesn't require my GPU. It doesn't require any of that stuff. It's just running on the browser. And it's just like, just show this stuff off, man. Like it's a cool looking footage. And as long as it's a real game that's going to come out, something that annoys me, but I actually think they do a good job at it, is when you see games, I'm going to call out some mobile games here, like Whiteout Survival or Homescapes, both games I've gotten addicted to. But when you see the ads, they're nothing like the game is. And that
Mm,
pisses me off. And you probably see a lot of those people. But the thing is, like, they worked. They got me to download the game. And it's just like, how do I praise that? But it also worked, right? Like it's this aggravating thing. But again, I think at this point, you need to find out what type of game are you making. Is it FPS? Is it a strategy? Is it a match 3? Whatever it is, right? Find out what audience those people live on. Just also do research. See what your competitors are putting out there. If you don't think you have competitors, you've clearly not done your research. But every game has a competitor out there. So see what works, what doesn't work. When you're scrolling, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, or anything, like what gets you to stop and look at the game? I think a lot of this depends on who you are and what gets your attention. But I'd be as simple as find a cool scene from the game, record 15 to 30 seconds of it, throw it on there, get the right hashtags, and get started there. And I'd also say start a Discord. It might just be a couple of friends at first, but get a Discord and just start asking questions to the people in there. What do you love? What don't you love? so on.
Yeah, I love that you share that example with that ad where it's like it's nothing like, so it works, but and stuff. And I guess one thing I'll comment on to that is, yeah, you're right, because if you really want to dig down into it, there's going to be certain characteristics to those types of ads that like tap into kind of like your reptilian part of the brain, right?
Mhm.
Like I think a classic example that I've always seen is they're showing an aspect of the game. It doesn't really communicate or align well with, let's say, maybe the whole experience. But what they're doing is they're purposely showing how someone's doing something wrong, and they've understood that. How often have we been in a situation where we see someone else playing like, no, don't do that, and you're trying to like be the backseat driver, be like, no, you got to do that. Wait, and it's so frustrating, right? And then
Yeah.
you're like, I got to play this now because I can't stand that person can't. And then you see the ad over and over. I can't stand this. I need to make sure that I'm actually doing it right because I know what to do now, right? So
I I love you. You're right. It's such a great thing, and I think it also plays into what I like to think is like the Twitch effect, where Gen Z and Gen Alpha like watching people play games,
yeah,
right? So another reason why you just put the content out there. But I love that. Hey, same thing goes for hate. Whether you do something wrong or you say something hateful, right? Like it it gets people engaged and
yeah.
worked up, and they'll like. I don't recommend it. Like that's not my style. But like you see a lot of people who are hampering on this stuff to get additional engagement. It's just frustrating that people engage because it's like a trap.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's conflict. Conflict is the
Yeah,
number one
that's
reason
a
why
better word for it.
movies are made in stories. Like no story is good if it doesn't have some type of conflict, challenge, obstacle, right? So that's
Mhm.
part of it too. But what I will add to that last point about the ads and stuff, ultimately my firm belief in is that it comes down to clarity and alignment. If you can align everything from the first interaction all the way down to the experience, I would say I would take that path over any other, just about almost any other time. There are going to be probably case by case situations or nuances, but other it comes down to that alignment. What are you pitching? Because you don't want to do bait and switch, because that's basically the other extreme is it's this, and you get there, it's like, wait, this is nothing that I expected. Oh, no alignment, and now you either piss people off or maybe you can excite them because you underdelivered and then overpromised, but usually it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, I do like the new style of ads on Unity that allow you to play the game.
Yeah, the
Actually,
playables. Yeah.
yeah, I actually like I don't want to click it because I feel like they're collecting my information when I do that. They're like, oh, Greg played, but
You
the
would
truth is,
think that.
yeah, if you have to wait 30 seconds anyway, like, all right, that's how I got into Whiteout Survival. I'm like, oh, I could do this. I like this mechanic. And then you download the game and it doesn't even have that mechanic in it. You're like, the hell, man.
Like, gotcha.
Exactly.
All right. I know we're on time here, but before we depart, we covered a lot today, Greg. So, based on what we discussed, are there any like tips, suggestions that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, man. Don't overlook community and don't overlook marketing. A lot of the indies are great at what they do. A lot of the people are in indies are focused on engineering, developing, design, right? That's great. Focus on what you're good at. Don't try and do things that are outside of your wheelhouse. If you have the funds to find people like Andrew who can help you with marketing, right? Like it would be a good investment to pay for someone who specializes in this stuff so you can focus on making a game. If you have the bandwidth to do it all, don't skip on the community building and marketing. This is how games go big. This is how games go viral. Yes, you still need a great game at the end of the day, or just a good game, or just a game. But again, community will help amplify your awareness, will help amplify your reach. And it's never, you shouldn't hesitate on spending money there because that will help you get more users in the long run.
Awesome. And I mean, anything else that you wanted to share too? Because I know there's a few other things that I think we could probably hone in on a little bit too. Like I know, like I'm sure there's like feedback because you had that great quote too about feedback and
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff. Just talk to your players, understand them, right? I mean, communication, I think, is the key to all this. If you're communicative with your audience, if you're communicative with your own team, if you're communicative with the community, right? You can get better understanding of where to go. I truly think we're in this world where people don't like communication as much, right? People rather text message or stuff like that. And that's fine too. You can tap into that. But I think at the end of the day, this all becomes about communication, how well you can communicate with one another, understand the vision and build the vision. Communication includes feedback. Communication includes marketing. Communication includes community, right? it's this whole thing that all comes down to how you properly communicate at the end of the day.
I love it. And again, I couldn't agree with Greg more. I think you guys all know that already, but yeah, communication, it's everything. It's how you share these stories. It's how you share these experiences. And that's ultimately what you are selling, what you are pitching to these people that want to have these experiences. So you got to communicate that well enough to them so they're on board and they join your Discord. So they play test, so they wish list and all these other actions. They come part of that because of how we communicate. Greg, I can't thank you enough for being here today. If people want to reach out, check out the podcast or anything else, please drop us some links so people connect or learn more.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for having me on the indie game movement. It's been an honor, a fun conversation. For anyone listening that wants to learn more about communities, player feedback, all that good stuff that we talked about, I am the founder of Player-Driven.io. You can look it up on, we're on podcasts and all the different platforms, just called Player Driven. I love to have communication, just chats with people. I love this stuff. I love hearing what people are doing. And I really appreciate what you do, Andrew, as well. It's kind of more of the same, which I think the more the merrier, right? We're all a team at the end of the day. We want to see gaming succeed. And I think if we can all collaborate, work together, I think it improves our reach or awareness. And again, we communicate with each other and send the message. So I appreciate all that. But check out Player Driven.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, I can't endorse Greg enough for, that podcast. Check it out. If you like what you listen to here, please check out the Player Driven podcast. Lots of great stuff. Greg, it's been an honor. Thanks for the kind words. And it's been a great conversation, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it as well, Andrew. And again, I'd love to continue it whenever we can. And I think we've got some great stuff going on. So thanks for your time.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.